Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to this virtual discussion from the Nature Conservancy in Alaska on the topic of resilient infrastructure in Alaska. We're pleased to have you join us. This is part of the Alaska Climate Opportunities Assessment Series hosted by the Nature Conservancy. The Nature Conservancy has engaged in a new effort this summer, the Alaska Climate Opportunities Assessment, to provide Alaskans with information about bipartisan climate solutions. The Nature Conservancy has partnered with McKinley Research Group to commission research on Alaska's unique opportunities to address climate change and assess the economic implications of recent, current, and future investments or policies. During today's discussion, we will explore the efforts and perspectives of infrastructure leaders from across our state, opportunities stemming from their work, and the initial findings of the Alaska Climate Opportunities Assessment. We have a wonderful panel today. It is bipartisan, diverse, and expert level panel of Alaskans to hear from, and they will respond to your thoughts and input as well. We have Hugh Short with us. He's the co-founder, chairman, and CEO of PT Capital, a private sector investment firm. Jocelyn Fenton is the program manager for Village Infrastructure Protection and Transportation Programs with the Denali Commission. Jackie Schaeffer is the Community and Development Manager, Division of Environmental Health and Engineering with Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium. Bruno Gruneau is the Regional Director of the Cold Climate Housing Research Center at the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. And I'm Cathy Giessel, former state senator and Senate president and nurse practitioner and lifelong Alaskan. Most of us are veterans of webinars these days, and so you're well aware of the Q&A opportunity here on your screen. So as we go along, as questions occur to you, please feel free to enter them in the Q&A box and we will address them. The word opportunity is key to this discussion. Clearly, the climate is changing, and we feel it acutely in Alaska with temperatures warming 2 to 3 times the national average. With climate change expected to cost Alaska hundreds of millions of dollars annually, we are well past time to plan and prepare. As I think about planning, I recall President Dwight D. Eisenhower's comment, "Plans are worthless, but planning is everything." We certainly can't fail to forecast events and weather because the world and people are not fully predictable. Plans then have to be cast aside, but a solid planning process makes all the difference in being prepared to nimbly respond regardless of how events unfold. Alaska is one of 8 Arctic nations. Well, I guess technically it's the United States, that's the nation part, but as a lifelong Alaskan, I think of my state as unique as a nation. If Alaska were a nation, we'd be in the top 10 in the world in multiple natural resources. Part of the foundation of wisely using those natural resource tools is embodied today in the panel of Alaskan speakers that we have and the organizations they represent discussing infrastructure. Infrastructure is a broad subject: roads, buildings, homes, water, wastewater, health clinics, food production, schools, roads, airports. From the perspective of a former state senator, all of these spell money and the question of who will pay for them. We've had some serious weather events this summer along our coasts. I want to begin with Jackie Schaeffer. Jackie, would you discuss with us your expertise in community resilience, relocation issues, and climate appropriate structures?
Yeah, good morning. I'm going to do my traditional introduction. Vanga atika Catalunya, vla lotak inipena ronga, anironga kikitagrame, nilagme Jessica, Jackie Schaeffer, Good morning. My Inupiaq name is Catalina. My English name is Jackie Schaeffer, and I was born and raised in the Northwest community of Kotzebue. So climate change to me is real. It's happened in my lifetime. And like everyone else on this panel, our stories are different because we've lived them. So climate change, indigenous knowledge, and modern science. 229 tribes, 11 distinct cultures, 20 languages, hundreds of dialects, 12 regions segregated across over 400 million acres of land, and 144 of those communities threatened by climate change. 43% of all communities in the state of Alaska. Infrastructure, resilience, and rural investment. How do impacts of climate change on infrastructure impact our people? Very personally. I'm normally a visual person, so I sent some photos in for share, and hopefully you could see some of those photos. Normally the story is easier to tell by seeing it, because seeing is believing, right? I've personally witnessed the changes in public policy administrations. Climate change is real, climate change isn't real. The systemic built-in inequities to our communities and our people. The inability to simply adapt and migrate as our ancestors had for over 10,000 years is a compounding factor that is usually left out of the climate change conversation. Alaska Native peoples are experts in their environment. We live in a symbiotic, harmonious stance with nature. We have done this for over 500 generations. Our mission at the Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium is that Alaska Native people are the healthiest people in the world. To achieve that, our approach must not only meet people where they're at, but provide innovative engineering, integration of modern science, research, and technology, and of course, a holistic approach. The guiding principle of the forthcoming 2021 Unmet Needs Report states that value-based decision-making led by community engagement and informed by Indigenous value systems and supported by actionable community-specific is necessary. So we know when we live in Alaska that every community is site-specific. The needs and the impacts are unique to that place. And that is a hard thing to share with people who don't get to see it or who don't live it. So in 2009, with the intent of understanding these connections between climate change, environmental impacts, and health effects, the Tribal Health Consortium founded the Center for Climate and Health. And under this program, we are then able to respond with adaptive, innovative, out-of-the-box engineering and designed to assist our people in a holistic manner that allows for a sustainable, healthy future. So whether it's using the sun to refreeze the ground with thermosiphons, utilizing flexible Arctic pipes because the pipes are pulling away from the homes as the permafrost melts, designing modular systems so that they could relocate with the community if necessary, or implementing portable alternative sanitation systems inside the homes so that we meet people where they're at. Our team is committed to this type of response, an appropriate response for the traditional cultures across our state. We have many programs that assist our communities and our tribes. We serve all 229 tribes. We have the Center for Environmentally Threatened Communities. We have the local Environmental Observation Network, which is now global. We help with relocation, adaptation planning. We assist communities that are sovereign, that want to relocate or mitigate without help from the federal government. But we still have that $80 million funding gap just for basic needs, so basic sanitation needs. So when you start below the bar, it's very difficult to adapt appropriately. So everything is unpredictable. Just like Senator said, we have increased precipitation, we have drought, flooding, permafrost thaw, coastal erosion, sea level rise, the loss of sea ice, rising temperatures, both ambient and subterranean. But we have that 10,000 or more years of Indigenous knowledge of adaptation. And if we could couple that with modern science, then the solutions will come to us. And those solutions could ripple across the globe. So however we respond could certainly help other people respond. And the beauty of their stewardship over this land as Indigenous people truly is captured by a dear friend of mine, retired Professor Paul Onktaguk. We've lived in places with such efficiency and grace that later people who have come to our homelands have considered them to be empty of human beings. And they've called this place a wilderness because it didn't see the people who had lived there. They could not imagine that a people could live so well in a land that it appear untouched by them. And we live with that dilemma today. So our response has to be very specific to the people, the culture, the lifestyle, and the needs. So whether it's housing or energy or sanitation systems, we must meet people where they're at in rural Alaska. Rihanna.
Jackie, that was great. You're right. I have heard many people talk about the pristine, untouched condition of Alaska, and yet our first Alaskans have lived here for uncounted years, right? And managed and been custodians of the land so responsibly. That was great, and a lot of information in there I'd like to talk more about during our Q&A time. So that's wonderful. Bruno, I'm going to turn to you next. Bruno Greneau is with the Cold Climate Housing Research Center, and they are leading the way, of course, in climate appropriate structures. I love the work of the Research Center there at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. There's even a transportation element. Right next to the center there in Fairbanks is a section of paved road utilizing air-cooled embankment. This is a construction method that isolates the roadbed from permafrost that's underneath, preventing the wonderful dips that children love to drive over, but of course the rest of us don't. It's this type of technique, I understand, has been used on the Trans-Siberian Railroad in the past. So in any case, I'm interested in hearing from you, Bruno, about construction, permafrost, and what we can do better. Welcome, Bruno.
Well, thank you so very much, and appreciate the opportunity to be here. I think it would help to sort of frame some more of who we are and why we're at this table, I think, today. So again, I'm Bruno Greneau, and I'm the regional director of, it's now NREL's Cold Climate Housing Research Center, which is the furthest north campus of that entity. But CCHRC, the Cold Climate Housing Research Center, was originally founded 22 years ago to address the challenges of housing in extreme climates. And this includes 50 homes in 50 below, cold, remote communities with no road access, really high energy costs. Just for context, the average Alaskan spends twice as much on energy as the average American. And if you're from rural Alaska, it's 3 or 4 times that. And because of the cost of construction, whether it's roads, as you just referred to, or actually specifically housing, there's a infrastructure-wise, we have terrible roads and we have incredible dire housing shortage. Back to the homes that were not designed for the climate are making people sick. And we're also, as you know, on the front lines of climate change, are warming twice as fast as the rest of the world. And I'll frame how we tackle that in a moment. To bolster our ability to address these issues, CCHRC joined with the National Renewable Energy Laboratory about a year ago. So what's great about this is that it combines NREL's wealth of knowledge and expertise in building energy technology and resilient communities, renewable energy and energy efficiency with CCHRC's decades of experience working in a similar space in building resilient buildings against climate change, entire communities, disaster response. And while I am part of NREL CCHRC, the 501c3 still exists, is strong to ensure this partnership can achieve the maximum benefits to Alaskans. So what are ways we look at that? There's kind of, when it comes to climate change, there's the ways we've been involved is addressing the issues early on and planning for them. A good example is the Oscarville Tribal Adaptation Planning that we did actually with Jackie Schaeffer. And it looked like this: community-led discussions. Let's pull together history, including oral history from elders and data and maps, and analyze this data and identify the missing information, and then set goals for the community and prioritize them. And then we create a plan and implement the plan, which includes finding funders and partners and timeframes. And when we're looking at climate change, we're talking about the built environment, but we look at all the threats and vulnerabilities, whether it's changes in precipitation in temperature or river levels or erosion, permafrost thaw. These are all the things this is pretty regular for us to pay attention to. Ice and snow changes. And then how does that impact water and sanitation and energy and food security and resilience? And that falls into safety and security. And of course, there's the housing. We have been involved in the more reactive response to climate change. This kind of overlaps with disaster response. So when the Yukon floods, such as what happened in Galena, we helped build the community back up, or build back better in today's catchy lingo, which means building more energy efficient, resilient housing that uses a fifth of the energy of its next door neighbor, and for less money in a typical home, but also means preparing the home for the next flood. In this case, raising these homes up. There's some innovations come in these with disasters and challenges come opportunities, innovation. When Crooked Creek flooded on the Kuskokwim River in, I think it was 2013, we were under the gun because this is a FEMA project. FEMA came in and said, hey, we'll give you money to help rebuild this community, but you've got about 5 months to do that. And I'll tell you, that's a challenge. So we managed to work together, created innovative, rapidly deployable housing system that can get the shell of a home framed up in a day. But this is a house that's energy efficient, healthy, won't grow mold or make people sick, and it's affordable to live in. And then the last example, of course, is Newtok. Newtok's a Yupik village in Western Alaska. It's been falling into the ocean, and they've been trying to solve this for 2 decades. We've been working with the village for over a decade to help design a new village, not just the houses themselves, but technical assistance and planning and workforce training they need to do to make it happen. It's 2016. I think we went in there and we designed a home specifically for the Bering Sea climate. And they moved this community is relocating to several miles upriver to a place called Mukhtavik. And this is where we were able to work with the crew to help train and build the demonstration home that they repeated in 2019 with about 20 more homes. And so in this case, it's about pulling in the workforce training so you can empower the community, right? And to say that almost sounds like it's a disempowered, so I shouldn't say it that way, but to additionally empower the communities, to give the communities control of their own future rather than an outside influence, which has happened time and time again. Big picture again, we've got 30 villages that are imminently threatened by climate change. Ultimately, there are 92 that are having to deal with erosion and flooding. That's all climate change related. And because this need is so urgent, what's our role here? We don't have a next decade to design the next home, or we have to what we're trying to do is build a library, rapidly deployable shelters that can work in different climates and land types. So when the next disaster happens, whether it's Alaska or Puerto Rico or Texas, we can quickly get these resilient housing solutions in place. So innovations, housing, just talked about it, energy efficient, durable housing. Get the energy use down, right? So that communities are less resilient on outside bulk fuels to keep their homes warm and their communities powered up. That also looks to like microgrids. All of these communities out there, they're all powered by diesel generators. And as we look to 100% clean energy, we need to figure out how to integrate more solar arrays, wind turbines, geothermal sources. And there's this vision of 100% clean energy by 2035 by the current administration. Alaska's the toughest nut to crack. And I happen to have the honor of talking to the Secretary of Energy on Sunday, and the message to her was like, there's no way we would achieve 100% clean energy by 2035 if we don't prioritize our underserved and frontline communities in Alaska first. So the vision here, because you're asking what's the vision from an energy standpoint, 100% clean energy for 100% of the people, but you got to start with energy efficiency, ensure that buildings are energy efficient and healthy. We don't want to just weatherize our homes without making sure these solutions will work up here. And then after energy efficiency, work to create more green power for the communities. So not just for the planet's sake, but for resilience sake. Alaska's got as much solar resource as Germany, who's second in the world for solar deployment. Alaska's just seasonal. So it'll be a while before the diesel generators are completely shut off and gone, but we're working on energy storage solutions now. Take those green electrons, turn them into hydrogen or ammonia, and then use them again. And then once we get to that high penetration green energy, then we can decarbonize, get rid of the oil for our heating, and then use these budding heating technologies like heat pumps that pull heat from the air or the ground and warm our homes while at the same time freezing the ground. And so anyway, so for all of this, we're just looking to resilient, energy efficient shelter or new water and power infrastructure, and just make sure it's resilient to handle our warming climate. So I think I used up all my time, and I think there's plenty of things to talk about after this. So thanks for the opportunity to share today.
Thank you, Bruno. That was great. You talked about homes making us sick, right? Inappropriately built homes. And I'm sure that Jackie will agree with this. One of the challenges with the COVID situation is that air exchange is a critical component to keeping people healthy in buildings. And yet in a cold climate, that air exchange can be costly because typically air exchange means pumping heated air out and bringing cold air in. But with a heat exchanger, right, you can remediate that. Anyway, we need to talk more about that during the discussion time. That will be great. Wonderful. So going on, Jocelyn is with us. Jocelyn is with the Denali Commission. Jocelyn, I've looked at the work plans for the Denali Commission, and I've noticed for several years now, village water, wastewater, and solid waste has been on the work plan. It's on the one for FY21 as well. Tell us more about all that and all the other work that the Commission is doing.
Yes, thank you so much, and thanks for having us. I thought I would give a little bit of a background for the Denali Commission. There may be some folks on the line that are not familiar with us. We've been around a little over 20 years. We're an independent federal agency focused on rural Alaska infrastructure. We're essentially a federal conduit for improvements in Alaska. And our programs, like Cathy mentioned, they're based on an annual work plan that's approved by our set of 7 commissioners and the Secretary of Commerce eventually. Our FY22 work plan will be published in the Federal Register for public comment very soon, should be any day. I keep checking the website. And we're also getting our new federal co-chair, and that's our leadership position. His name is Garrett Boyle, and he'll be starting August 30th. And we will be bidding adieu to Mr. John Torgerson, who has been at the helm since right around when COVID struck last year, March of 2020. And he's been our interim federal co-chair and has been doing a great job, with all of our projects that we've had here during the pandemic. It's been great having him. So our programs encompass a number of different subject matters. We've got energy, bulk fuel, village infrastructure protection, transportation, water and sanitation, like you mentioned, housing, health facilities, broadband, workforce development, and economic development. You were asking about our water and sanitation program. We had a legacy program, and it went dormant for a few years while we were focusing on village infrastructure protection, and that's the focus on environmental threats such as permafrost degradation, flooding, and erosion. But we have reinvigorated that program. We have some wonderful partnerships with Indian Health Service, EPA, and the state of Alaska, covering some ineligible costs for water and sanitation improvements around the state. And that's been working out really great these last 2 years. We use priority lists for, Indian Health Service actually does also use a priority list called the Sanitation Deficiency System. And we also use priority lists for our VIP, village infrastructure protection, and our bulk fuel facilities. And these last 2 I mentioned, actually SDS has begun incorporating it as well, is looking at environmental threats such as permafrost degradation, erosion, and flooding into these threats, into these priority lists. That increases an element of funding to focus on communities that are battling these environmental threats. The Denali Commission has also added language to our terms and conditions that designs and planning and construction must include some element of climate change to a reasonable degree and not base things on just as they have been, in previous modeling. It's really, let's look to the future. Are we having, different climate expectations here coming up? We partner with a number of other agencies and organizations. ANTHC is a huge partner, YKHC, and others. With ANTHC, we fund that Center for Environmentally Threatened Communities. They are, a grants technical assistance organization. Communities can reach out and get assistance in applying for other federal funds that could help with battling these environmental threats. We're also involved in those active thermosiphons to try to keep the ground frozen. Huge partnership in managing the Newtok relocation to Muktivik, other things like that. We partnered with Yukon-Kuskokwim Health Corporation on some projects raising homes, to keep them from being affected by flooding. Also, some of those flexible service connections Jackie mentioned earlier. We also have transfer authorities. We partner with other federal agencies such as EPA. We're helping with the backhaul of the Household Hazardous Waste Program. We partner with Department of Energy and providing technical assistance, education, and they have a new effort on resiliency of energy systems in terms of climate change. We've also had some conversations with Department of Defense, and they're looking at Arctic and subarctic climate resilience and severe weather events affecting military installations, assets, and some of their missions. So this is definitely, it's all very on point and timely, to be having these conversations. Some of our tools, the funding that we get is considered no-year money. It's obligated until, or it's available until obligated, until spent. And then we have such broad authority. Like I mentioned, we have all of these different programs. We can essentially work in any sort of realm in Alaska, focused on rural Alaska. And we found that sweet spot is some of that environmental and, planning portions, pioneering communities because of such broad authority, enabling communities to really get started, with some sort of, managed retreat or pioneering community to then lean on some of the more traditional funding mechanisms that can be available. And so I guess overall, we focus on rural Alaska and, that coordination aspect and, pretty much can work with anyone, and happy to see everyone else here.
Great. Thank you very much, Jocelyn. That was very interesting. I've known about the Denali Commission, of course, for all of its years of existence, but it's interesting to hear how you coordinate with everyone. And of course, one of my concerns was who pays for all of this, and you're one of the conduits for that federal money. So that's great. So speaking of money, but quickly before I go to that, I just want to remind our audience that our speakers would be happy to take your questions. So be sure to enter those in the Q&A section on your screen. So let's turn to Hugh Short now. Hugh is with PT Capital, and that is an Alaskan-born investment firm. Hugh, earlier I talked about all of these elements that need attention. As a former state senator, they all spell money to me and who will pay. How do you see the private sector, you're a private sector investment firm, how do you see the private sector partnering with government agencies like the Denali Commission or Alaska state government?
Well, thanks for the opportunity. This is great. Just a little background. My name's Hugh Short. I am originally from Bethel. Actually, my short public service career was being mayor of Bethel, I think over 20 years ago now. So just a little bit about PT Capital. What we are is an Arctic investment firm. We invest into Alaska. We currently have investments in Iceland and Finland. I actually just got back from 8 days in our European assets. And I think there's really three themes that I see, and I'm trying to focus on the opportunity, Senator, because I think that's really where I try to find opportunity to deploy capital. Investors like certainty. Investors struggle with uncertainty, and so a lot of what we look at in these three categories are areas where I think government can partner with the private sector. I think first is housing. You go to a project that's actually very real time with your former colleague, Senator Hoffman, who our family's in the midst of developing a, ultimately it'll be 300 unit development in Bethel. This is the first subdivision development in Bethel in over 25 years almost. What climate change has done in that specific region has actually increased the population of Bethel to become the third or fourth largest city, the third busiest airport in Alaska. And housing is a huge issue. And so when you have shifting permafrost, you have essentially an overlay of federal, native, and state land, environmental regulations, the Army Corps of Engineers, wetlands, the City of Bethel regulations on water and sewer, the lack of water and sewer infrastructure, and then the strain it puts on roads because you have to truck water and sewer to over 50% of the community. It makes development incredibly challenging. What I found through that project is that the working with the local, state, and federal agencies tends to be more of a who can win battle versus how can we work together to create more housing. And I don't have any specific recommendations, but I just from a fact of looking at residential subdivision development in rural Alaska. At this point, the subdivision is oversubscribed for buyers because there's such demand. But when you add in all the costs of the different layers of governments requiring different requirements, it actually makes these projects quite expensive. And for many locations and many investors, it's just not worth the time and the hassle when they have other opportunities. I'd say the second area of opportunity is in telecom. There will be an unprecedented amount of capital coming into the state of Alaska over the course of the next 3 years, either through tribes or through the telecoms to build out infrastructure and connectivity in rural Alaska. Again, back to my favorite place, Bethel. Bethel currently is connected by a microwave tower system, which when designed did not have significant weather impacts. But since the climate has changed, many of these hilltop locations, mountaintop locations, ice up in the winter. It puts the network down because you've got significant icing that happens on these towers, and it actually creates a pretty small pipe to serve that many people. Let's call it 28,000 people out in the YK Delta. I think what we're going to see in the next 3 to 4 years is fiber across rural Alaska. Currently, there's fiber into Nome, fiber into Kotzebue, fiber into Ukqiavik. I think fiber into Dutch Harbor on Alaska very soon, and fiber into Bethel, which is going to create huge opportunities for diversifying the local economies, reduce the cost of broadband, create opportunities for startups and technology and distance learning that we've all gotten too familiar with COVID. And I think that that's going to be a significant opportunity for investment from the private sector into rural Alaska that ultimately can educate and create significant jobs. I'd say the final area that I spend a lot of time on is tourism. We have over 18 hotels in Iceland and Finland. We're currently looking at Greenland because Greenland is getting to 15,000 foot runways, which I think is a game changer for Greenland. And here in Alaska, just as an anecdote, we've got a helicopter company that provides glacier tours to out of Girdwood and out of Anchorage, Alpine Air Alaska. In June and July, we have never flown as many people to glaciers as we have in the history of the company. That's really driven by an interest from Americans and international travelers to get to glaciers, get to see them before they disappear, as the media portrays and as actually is happening. And it's driving huge tourism opportunities in the hotel sector and the attraction sector and experiences. And Alaska will be a huge beneficiary of that over the course of the next decade. And I think rural Alaska can also be a participant in the expanding tourism business. I think there's a huge demand of tourists getting away from the sort of standard cruise ship where you're on a bus and you kind of look out and, you know, no, nothing against them, but it's, you don't see the real Alaska, to the ability to go out and build infrastructure in partnership with the governments to create tourism opportunities in some of our most beautiful places off the road system. So again, I think from an investor standpoint, we look for return, we look for certainty, we look for partnerships and with the government, as opposed to let's see who can beat each other up the most. And I think that from my perspective, Alaska presents a very solid investment space over the course of the next decade. Happy to take any questions. It's an honor to be on this panel.
Hugh, thank you for joining us today and giving us your perspective. I appreciate that. Tourism, of course, Alaska's had a lot of tourism for a lot of years, and you're right, the tourists do see a very very narrow perspective of Alaska. My father used to be a captain for Wien Airlines, and as a child, he was always busy in the summer taking folks mostly north up to Kotzebue, Nome, what was Barrow, Reykjavik now. But tourism creates jobs, local jobs. And that's another key part of infrastructure. The more jobs we can create that are local, the more we build these economies and opportunities for folks. So our audience is welcome to type in questions. I have a question for Bruno from our audience. So Bruno, this is a question for you. I believe that the Cold Climate Research Center has developed energy efficient housing with different innovations to address climate change. Are these houses really affordable to rural individuals? I'm thinking of Quinnipiac, where a house is over $200,000. Thank you for your work.
Well, thank you for the question. Let's just start with part of the reason that housing is just so expensive number one, housing is more expensive up here than other places in the lower 48 because everything you're shipping it all in, and just getting it here to Fairbanks is a challenge enough. And we're connected to the road system. But now take a house that you can build a new house for, $215 a square foot, built right here in Fairbanks, and then imagine what it takes to take everything that it takes to build a house, which is the materials, it's the people, to the skill set to move it out, and the skill set to build it, and transplant that to a community where you have to fly in, or you have to go up a river, or take a couple of planes to get to. And so that is what makes the cost just go really through the roof. A good example is a house in Anaktuvuk Pass. It was $750,000, not one we built before we got there, but half of that was just getting the materials in on a flight. And then on top of that, a lot of this comes in on barges. What happened, we have a window. We have a very short window when these barges can move, when there's no ice, and you got to get it there early in the spring so you have time to build during our construction season. So what happens when we have we miss our weather windows, and then the barge doesn't come in until too late in the season? It pushes you to the next year. So I'm kind of getting into some of the challenges of building. One of the things we've been able to demonstrate is we've been able to, the other piece that makes it so expensive is just the administrative costs of working through sometimes housing authorities, et cetera. There's just a lot of costs that gets piled onto these particularly rural homes. What we're able to do is work with each of these communities, whatever scenario they're in, some more expensive than others, we're able to help those communities lower their housing costs, whether it's to a little degree or a big degree. But no matter what, we're always making sure that the homes in the end are energy efficient. And I'm talking not like just a little bit less. I'm talking reducing the heating by 4/5, right? And making sure, as you brought up, that the homes are healthy. that you got the clean air, and you're not growing mold and things like that. Does that answer your question?
That's great. We'll see if the audience member wants to follow up on that. I would follow up just by asking, how much do you endeavor to use local workforce to construct the homes?
Every time we have an opportunity, and that's almost every time. So here's the thing, we're not coming in here, we're not the builders, right? So what we do is say, hey, look, this community, you've been here for over 10,000 years, right? We're not just bringing in homes either. You've been here. How do we take the knowledge, the place-based and generational knowledge of people who have lived here for 10,000 years, and then bring our tool sets to the table and merge them? So it's all about co-developing something that works for that community. So like you mentioned, someone mentioned Quinnahock, right? What came out of Quinnahock? The community said, we want a house that's going to keep us warm. We want it affordable. We don't want you bringing in outside housing. We want to build it ourselves. And so two really unique things came out of that. One is the shape of the house. The shape was an octagon. Why is it octagon? Well, the traditional house, sod house of great grandparents of people who are still alive today were round in shape. And so one of the things that was really not apparent when you go to build a house, if you have a house that's shaped like a shoebox and sitting on the ground, they have wind and snow that blows from all different sides. And on the lee side of the house, all the snow dumps. And we've all seen the picture where someone opens up the front door and they can't get out because they dropped the snow. The inherent shape of the house is that it drifts the snow away during the snowstorms and it pulls the snow away from those homes. So that was something that's part of that traditional knowledge, right? And then the other piece was workforce development. Again, it's one thing for us to demonstrate a home, but if it can't be repeated, and the only way it can be repeated, well, if it can't be repeated, it's not a success. So to ensure that, we make sure that it's about training people. If we're teaching people to build differently, or if we're building differently, we need to teach them how to build differently. And so that is a key component to every project that's out there, so that we're just starting the engine up, and the idea is let the community run with it.
That's great. And that really fits with what Jackie brought up at the very beginning. The centuries of life here in the Arctic of the indigenous peoples and their knowledge about the best way to do things and how to blend and sustain the environment. That's great. And I'm a huge advocate of local folks doing the work. I worked for the North Slope Borough, did work for them for 9 years, and it was great to see the local folks maintaining those school buildings. Jackie, did you want to add something? I see you signed on there.
Yeah, I think that, we have to look at not only one aspect. When you look at rural Alaska and the communities in rural Alaska, if we want them to continue to thrive, we have to recognize everything. And so that holistic approach is not just about the Western perspective, it's about the cultural perspective. And you have hidden economies like subsistence use that say Newtok. Newtok is almost 80% subsistence use. So if climate change impacts the food resource, you're taking away 80% of their food security by that. So, so it comes back to if the ambient temperatures are rising, you can't store traditionally the way you used to store. So now you need energy systems. And if those energy systems are too costly, then people can't afford them. And so that interconnectivity to all those systems is vitally important. You can't just talk about housing or economics or energy. You have to talk about it all. And I think that this group all understands. I work quite frequently with this panel, and we partner a lot. So we try to bring that to the table every single time we're together, is that it's not just about money. If there weren't people, we wouldn't need money. If there wasn't that richness of culture, our state wouldn't be what it is. And I like to use the imposed state of Alaska cultural image over Europe, because that's how diverse we are. It's not just about a bunch of natives in rural Alaska. There are 11 distinctly different cultures. It's like going to Europe and saying to the Polish man that, you know what, you're no different than that guy in Spain. You're all just the same Europeans. Well, we wouldn't do that, but yet it's done here. So when you look at housing and you integrate traditional knowledge, you're taking something and creating new space. And to me, you have to have that inclusive conversation of interconnectivity, because when it comes down to people and the impacts, it's their health and well-being that we want to protect.
Very good. I appreciate that, Jackie. You know, as a nurse practitioner, I consider food a medicine. If we treat food as a medicine and we take care of the food that we eat, making sure that it is in fact healthy and what our body needs, we're going to be healthier people. And subsistence fits that bill, but we've got to protect those resources. I've got a question, actually a couple of them for Hugh. So Hugh, this comes from Tina Buxbaum. She says, as far as using climate information, how does a company or group such as yours access and use that kind of information? Where do you go for that information? Do you even use climate information in decisions?
It's a great question. It's something we really struggle with, I think. A couple examples. We were looking at an investment here in Alaska that primarily based on there being snow in the winter, and primarily, it was a big part of the business. And if you recall, over the last, let's call it 9 years in South Central Alaska, it's been pretty scarce to get snow. And so when you underwrite sort of an investment and you say, well, what's the next 10 years like? Is there less snow? Is there more snow? What's the trend say? And so you really just have to take a look at that and gather as much information as possible and factor that into evaluation. And it frankly is a lot more art than science at this point, because the data is so new. Another example, I think Washington State's going through this right now, but in the Nordics and Scandinavia, hotels were not built for hot weather. And so when you acquire a property, you have to take into account that now many of these cities are seeing temperatures approaching 100 degrees. And you're talking about buildings built 60, 70 years ago. And how do you retrofit a concrete building to be able to handle the climate? And how do you factor that into your investment decision? And so how do you do that? And really it's you try and gather as much information as possible. A lot of the information is local knowledge. So, you look at petroleum infrastructure in rural Alaska. Folks have been building bulk fuel tanks for 50 years out there. And you look at a lot of the infrastructure that's out there now, and the lifespan of a bulk fuel tank has gone down significantly because the permafrost is not stable. So how do you, so you got all these costs that you have to factor in, and the local knowledge is critical depending on where you're operating at.
Very good. Thank you, Hugh. Another question for you comes from Melanie. Hugh, looking at your portfolio, there seems to be a disconnect between the Alaska trends you shared and the international investments PT Capital has shared publicly. Can you talk more about your work with Alaska investment opportunities, particularly in rural Alaska, as their telecom infrastructure improves drastically? And sort of a connected question, Hugh, this comes from Mike. I'll just throw this in at the same time because it's kind of the same. Have you helped finance a solar farm or wind farm in Alaska? So telecom, solar, wind, what were your investments like?
I think I'm really, this is a great question. I think I'm really blessed. So I've done a lot of work in the past for GCI, and I've seen what GCI has built out in rural Alaska, and it's I think it's amazing infrastructure. But more important, at least for me, is our largest investment is a telecom in Iceland. And I think we serve about 175,000 Icelanders. We have a 5G mobile network. We provide fiber to the home that's primarily provided through the government. So it's a much different strategy in the Nordics because the government is quite involved in the provision of broadband. And if you look at the number of startups and the number of entrepreneurs and the amount of investment dollars going into Icelandic companies over the course of the last 20 years, for 360,000 people, it's a huge amount of money. And you look at the startup community in Alaska, and it's starting to emerge. And there's real talent that's starting to be developed here in real valuable companies. My hope is that as fiber gets more prevalent in rural Alaska, that more opportunity is created in these hub communities and in the villages to create valuable companies and to remote work and to do all the things that I think are an opportunity. As far as solar or wind, we have not invested in Alaska in those types of technologies.
All right, very good.
Maybe I need to improve my website too.
Thank you, Hugh. I want to ask a question now about workforce. There's a question here looking at workforce and how we incorporate that. And I want to start with Jocelyn with this one. Jocelyn, you look at a lot of projects. How do you look at incorporating local workforce in the projects that you are investing in?
Quite often we use, force account method where, let's see if my camera turns on, where they're using local labor through, an account that they put together, and that helps both train folks if they don't have the proper training, but then also, gives jobs to people that do have training. So it's on the job training, but also opportunities for folks that have that training. We do have workforce development categories that train both fuel facility operators, power plant operators, but also, from an economic development perspective, trying to increase, the offerings of rural communities. Mariculture, we're looking into a lot of different mariculture projects, along the Southeast, all down the chain, and Western Alaska. So I don't know, did that answer your question? Can I?
Yeah, that's great. Great, thank you.
I did want to mention, we do have some STEM outreach and education for K through 12 students around the state. That was planned to be more in person around the 12 regions of Alaska, but it's kind of pivoted to more virtual participation, which has increased the ability for kids to participate. So that's been really great. And then we've also seen an opportunity for, more, I think there could be a great training program that's incorporated in the high schools, beyond, STEM education and natural resource education, to be, how do you run your town? Everything from power plants to, if you have water and sewer sanitation facilities, things like that. So the future is bright. And incorporating some of those things in the high school, I think would be a really great idea.
I would agree with you, Jocelyn. The next generation, that's who we want to be inspiring. And, they're the generation that we're hearing most loudly from concerning climate change and their concern about the future. So that's great, incorporating them. There's a question that's broad, and so I'll just let anyone who wants to chime in. It says, please address the environmental impacts of tourism and how we can minimize the negative impacts, noise, pollution, carbon costs. It kind of connects also with another question that Kurt has put in. Incorporating traditional environmental and cultural knowledge into planning is crucial. And, I see that connecting to tourism as well. How do tourism groups decide what tourists should see about our state? But Hugh, it looks like you wanted to chime in on that tourism, impact of tourism.
Yeah, it's you know, COVID's provided a real life experiment in this. So um, from 2010 to 2019, tourism grew from 200,000 people to 2.6 million in Iceland. And the national parks, the attractions were not prepared, lacking restrooms, roads, all sorts of things. And once COVID hit, the government, you know, was able to take a pause, and the society was able to take a pause. And I think folks there are really reset on how do we do tourism in a way that doesn't ruin our environment. And so what's that mean? It means less tourists who stay longer, who, you know, where infrastructure is built out, and controlling the tourism. I think you saw this all across the world. Venice, for the first time, you could see clear water during 2020. I think Juneau has been an interesting city to watch with cruise ships. And how do they do that? And a lot of this is being driven by large investors like the Alaska Permanent Fund, pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, who are now demanding ESG, environmental, social, and governance provisions in the investors they invest into. They demand accountability for decisions to be made in the best way for the environment, for the local stakeholders and communities, and governance that reflects diversity, women, minorities, all of those things. And I think that this is going to benefit, I think, our global society as this is required further and further. You know, just a small little anecdote. We operate out of Girdwood. Anyone who's spent any time in Girdwood realizes that local government is very active. And when you do helicopters in Girdwood, you are very aware that noise out of helicopters could be disastrous to your business. And so what we do is we fly extra long loops to avoid buildings. We work with the local community to make sure that our impact from their quality of life as small as possible. And I think the third thing we do is we give back to the community. So we support the community, whether it's search and rescue or any efforts that are that come up. So I think it's, you know, every investor needs to take accountability for all of those factors and make smart decisions that benefit society.
Very good. Thank you, Hugh. Jackie, did you want to chime in on this question?
Yeah, I just want to add to that. Thanks, Hugh. You know, when it comes to economic drivers in a community, you know, most of our rural communities, because of not only the logistic challenges, but just the setup of the community struggle when it comes to unemployment and lack of jobs. If there's only 12 jobs in the community and there are 50 working adults for those 12 jobs, but the jobs are taken, those are not counted towards unemployment. So it shows that there is no unemployment in that community. But the reality is, if you look at it through a different lens from the community perspective, then you see that the inequities in some of the processes that are you know, driving those numbers. When it comes to I do see that as an economic opportunity for communities, but the key would be, just like Kurt had mentioned, crucial is the partnerships. We have tourism at the state level. Very little do you whittle down to the local level. So if you're going to do ecotourism or geotourism, then you have to talk to somebody who lives there. Otherwise, you're not really involving them. And that happens a lot. There are a lot of lodges and fisheries that are being utilized by private enterprise that are not collaborating with those local and regional entities. And so to me, it's not an adversity, it's more of an inclusion. You just need to include those people and then bring them to the table so that they can make the decisions alongside you. And to me, I think that the dialogue is starting to shift. I think I hope that at the state level it ripples down, but I really see that, you know, we have tribes, they have federal to federal status. They certainly can rise up and demand that that inclusion be there. And it is on behalf of the, you know, the wellness of those people, they should be included. they should have the opportunity to be part of the economic driver. So.
Very good. Yes. And of course, it also, the local people have the opportunity to make that tourism experience more genuine. And also, of course, protect the privacy of the community. A lot of aspects there. Anik has asked a question that I've been thinking about, and I'd like to hear from the group about. And he addresses it to Hugh, but I think all of the speakers can address this, and it deals with water and wastewater, and I'll add solid waste to that. The question directed to Hugh was, several communities severely lack water and wastewater infrastructure. Could private investment be part of the solution to this problem? So Hugh, the question is addressed to you. Would you like to speak to it first? And then I know Jocelyn has, it's certainly her lane as well. So go ahead, Hugh.
Yeah, I think it's tough. I think rural Alaska, you know, it's volumes and its number of population served. And I think in rural Alaska, let's just take Bethel, for example. Bethel does not have the number of people to support charging a monthly fee for water and sewer that's piped, that would be affordable, that then pays for the system. The math doesn't work. You know, you need a couple $100,000. I mean, Anchorage, it works. You can go out to bonds. You can get bonds. You can pay for it. Here, it just in Bethel, it just doesn't work. So I think it's a scale problem, and it's construction cost problem. And I think it's a responsibility of the state and federal government to provide basic provisions of water and sewer in rural Alaska. I think that to ask private sector to do that, probably you're going to get an answer of the numbers just don't work.
Thanks, Hugh. Jocelyn, this certainly falls into the Denali Commission's lane.
Right. And with our partnership with IHS, you know, there's been some real forward momentum on covering some of the ineligible costs with some of their program with our flexible funding. But yeah, just like Hugh said, the issue, surprisingly, it's not even the capital costs, it's the operation and maintenance of the systems. You know, I just have some stats here for folks. So Stebbins, $68 million to put in water and sewer for 135 homes. The operational costs have actually been offset by the CDQ to $115 a month. And so that project may be moving forward. But if you can consider that an extra $115 a month, you know, how does that fall into your, you know, household's budget? But then you have, you know, a situation where it can creep up to $135 a month or $145 a month, you know, for a community between 90 and 162 people. Like Hugh said, you've got to have the numbers for a system like that to work, and we don't want to burden a community with having to, you know, pay for something that they really can't afford. Now, one thing that's really exciting is that the infrastructure bill has a ton of money going to IHS, and a huge percentage of that, I can't remember the specific number, comes to Alaska. So we do have the potential to really ramp up and expand water and sanitation in rural Alaska. But then we still have to figure out, how do we cover those operation and maintenance costs? How do we offset them to make them affordable and to keep the systems up and running for their design life? You know, we don't want these systems to, you know, default into disrepair if we don't have the right, you know, trained operators and funding, you know, to pay them to take care of the facilities.
Very good. I'm glad you brought up that infrastructure bill that that Congress is working on. Certainly Senator Murkowski's worked hard on that, but I see what you're saying. It's that ongoing cost as well. Jackie, did you have thoughts on this?
Yeah, so that is a very difficult question. You know, when you look at infrastructure infrastructure investment for water and sanitation, we have over 3,000 homes that are still unserved. That means they've never been served with water and sanitation. So you can look at it through a couple different lenses. If you look at it through the law, it says that the federal government will provide basic sanitation services to rural Alaskans, right? So where are we failing along that process? And the other piece is that maintenance and operations of these investments. So if you have an average investment of say 50 to 70 million dollars, but the maintenance and operations is such a burden on the community that that system cannot function once it's implemented, then the system fails. So who's at fault here? And so, you know, that conundrum has kind of been the 50-year history of our state in water and sanitation. We've had governors that said they were going to make the honey bucket piece of the museum. Well, we still haven't done that. There are so many issues that kind of make this conversation difficult, but I would say the most difficult thing is looking at all the systems in place, be it the state of Alaska's best practices scores or the SDS requirements, or the state match when the state says they don't have any money. I mean, so there's layers to this that it's not as simple as can we just build it and then it'll be okay. This investment has to be something that is sustainable. And in order to be sustainable, you have to have those economic drivers, which is that scale of economy, in order for it to be sustainable. So some of our innovative solutions are how do we fill that gap until we make it sustainable, right? Until we find that solution. And so those portable sanitation systems. Stebbins was one of our communities. I'm glad you brought it up, Jocelyn. I inspected homes in Stebbins for mini pass installation in response to COVID so that people had access to hand washing stations to wash their hands. Imagine living in a village that had no water and sanitation, and every single time you used water, imagine brushing your teeth, washing your face, washing your hair, washing your kids, cleaning up, everything, every single piece of water that was used in the home, you had to haul there. And then you had to haul that waste out as well. So physically, it's a strain. For our elders, it's a huge strain. But then a pandemic hits and you're told by everyone to wash, 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 but you don't have access to that water. So the conversation isn't as simple or cut and dry as let's just get water and sewer out there. But there's that other piece. If we don't find the solution, the health disparities that were in the health indicators without water and sanitation, they quadruple in rural Alaska, sometimes even 10 times higher with some illnesses. And so what we have to do is look at it from both sides, step back far enough to say, is it a better health investment to create systems that are sustainable, even if we have to help sustain them, just like power cost equalization, because of that logistic challenge, right? And then it's sustainable, but we have to make sure we protect that sustainability of it. And so to me, that's where the conversation needs to go. And it's not, I know some people just want answers. Why can't we just do it? It's not that simple. And then you add climate change to that. If you're investing in a community that is being hit by erosion, permafrost melt, flooding, and storm surges, how do you protect that $70 million investment when you can't predict climate change and you certainly can't control Mother Nature? So, you know, the picture is hard to swallow, but what we have to do is talk about how do we get to that new solution that has a sustainable piece to it. And to me, it's going to take some creative thinking and some really innovative engineering and some flexibility from the funding side. And I know about this a lot. That adaptability has to come from everyone, not just the people, but the funders as well.
Very good, Jackie. Bruno, innovation in this area. You might be the guy that knows about that.
Well, it's funny, you know, this is one of the places we have to be really careful about, because with any kind of major investment by by our, U.S. government. It's easy for people to get lost and bulldozed over, right? So here, I have some concerns with, say, weatherization, right? So it's exciting. Weatherization is important. We want to make sure that we can increase the energy efficiency of our homes, of our buildings, of our schools, all of that. But we've been down this road before. So when we were out in Quinnahock, the reason we were out there to begin with, there's a great picture of Jackie Bear on the front page of ADN, where there were homes that were built in the 80s, and then around 2000 they've been weatherized, and the way they weatherize them is they put polyisofoam on the outside just a little bit, and what happened is it exacerbated all the problems. It trapped the moisture in there. Now they weren't just cold houses, they were rotting houses. I think there's a picture of Jack sticking his number 2 pencil into that foundation. So we don't want to repeat that. We have plenty of information out there. We have plenty of expertise. We actually have a lot of builders who do know better, but there are plenty who don't. And the potential to repeat these mistakes are there. And so I think we just need to be a little bit careful. We need to be careful about when we get excited about weatherization, that we're doing it based on information we know that works up here. Now, thankfully, we've got 20 years of expertise and stuff to help with that. And there are a lot of, we're not the only ones who know, but there are a lot of people, and the idea if more people know, then we've done our job. But that's a place where we can help provide some guidance and help maybe make weatherization more impactful. And I'll just say a thing about weatherization, right? The state invested between the home energy rebate program and the weatherization program several years ago. It was about $620 million the state invested, and it was a $2 billion return on investment in terms of economic impact. So it's important, and it's important to the health of the people and the homes and the money, et cetera, and our our CO2 reduction. But we just got to do it correctly.
So Bruno, does the Cold Climate Research Center do anything related to water, wastewater, and how to incorporate that in the buildings? I think there's some new innovations in solid waste. I won't call it treatment, but management, individual entities in a home that can manage this. I've just vaguely known about it. What would you add to that, Bruno?
I think there are 2 answers I'd like to speak to, one of which I'll pass the ball to Jackie on. You'll know where I'm going, I'm sure, Jackie. But anyway, first off, there was a home we went at Nantucket Pass 15 years ago, and we had to build this home. But to bring water and sewer from across the street, the numbers vary, but it's something like $100,000 to dig a trench and connect that house to the water and sewer system across the street, right? So it means bringing in the equipment. It's really expensive, really difficult. So the solution in this case, and it's been all over Alaska, you're seeing it more and more, are individual sewage treatment plants. We actually have one down here at CCHRC that takes care of our waste. It is an aerobic digester. It takes it's about it would fit in you can fit probably a couple of them in your bedroom, right? And that's great. It's a system that takes some energy, it takes some maintenance, and it can work really well. You got to stay on top of it. It's not flawless, right? So, but it's a good solution, because these are also communities, obviously. I mean, if you're in permafrost, it's really a challenge to have a septic system. It's not impossible, but it's a real challenge. Anyway, so the other piece, I think I'd like to just, if it's okay, Jackie, I'd like to let you talk about something we worked on together, which is a portable alternative sanitation system, which you referenced earlier. Would you mind speaking to that, Jackie?
No, not at all. So that's a unique part of Alaska, is we have this small community, right? So we get to work with each other on a regular basis. The portable alternative sanitation system was a system that was designed in collaboration with partners. We had Life Water Engineering in Fairbanks that did the sanitation piece. We had Cold Climate Housing that worked on the air quality piece. We had Camp Water industries out of Delta Junction that worked on the water piece. And so, and ANTHC worked on the collaboration and the funding mechanisms to put it all together to get them installed into homes. This is different than the system that CCHRC has in their building. That was also engineered and designed by Life Water Engineering in Fairbanks, which is an individual system, but it weighs a lot. And so if you're putting it on melting permafrost and then you're discharging the effluent liquid onto the permafrost, you're creating another cycle of melt. And so our approaches have been, how do we do this? Is it safer to install water into rotting homes, or is it safer not to? And the process for the funding mechanism doesn't really leave any kind of flexibility for that. So we have to shift to, is it healthy to do this? And is it healthier to create a healthy environment with what we're dealing with now? Or do we wait another 50 years and do nothing? And so that's kind of where we're at. Fortunately, with these portable alternative sanitation systems, when we relocated Newtok to Maklavik, CCHRC was there. It comes down to design. Are we designing the right houses for the environment, for the culture, for the lifestyle? And then how did they live before that they didn't have all these issues? If you go to any rural Alaskan fish camp that has no water and sanitation, somehow they know where to get safe drinking water. Somehow they dispose of their human waste and their rubbish in a very sustainable manner, because there's never a dump there. And so how do we get that mindset and that traditional knowledge into the communities of these Western systems? So that, again, is something that I look at, that human behavior component, whether it's a running water system or an alternative system or even a life water system, it comes down to the people. If they don't embrace it and they don't own it themselves, then it's a failure. Why? Because eventually it's not important enough to them to take care of it, and therefore it fails. And so that human behavior component of meeting people where they're at and really creating a healthier environment takes a whole big giant picture. And we're on the path of looking at those designs. How do we design this so that the future, those new kids coming up, when they live in those communities, all that innovation has come partially from them, partially from the Indigenous elders, and then partially from modern technology. And we create something and design something that's truly appropriate for rural Alaska.
Very good. Actually, very exciting that this kind of work is being done. I appreciate you highlighting that. So being a little more broadly, we have this infrastructure bill in Congress, and I don't know how many of you have looked it over. It touches on a lot of things in here. Do you think these are going to be impactful? What would you most look forward to? I see one of the things that appealed to me, and I don't know what the rest of you think, but the food security support for farmers and ranchers. Now, I know that might sound a little odd for Nome, for example, but Pilgrim Hot Springs up there is looking at the potential of establishing some farming up there. I know what it costs in rural Alaska to get fresh fruit and vegetables, and the potential for actually producing it locally. I understand Bethel has a heat recovery program in their community, and I think I've heard of some agricultural opportunities there too. What do we know about food security related to farming, and how climate change may actually be an opportunity to expand that?
I'll jump in. Just because I currently live in Palmer, and as I look at the farms here, I'm blown away when I work on state level resilience, and I look at and I hear continually that we have 10 days of food coming into our state, and that's our food security. Because I subsist, probably 50% or more of my food is off the land. It's free from nature, right? So as long as I'm a good steward, I'll be able to harvest those. But I also have a huge garden because I live in Palmer. The one thing with rural Alaskans is that it goes back to meeting people where they're at. It will work in areas where people are adapted to fresh fruits. I grew up in Kotzebue. There was no water and sanitation. The school served canned everything. I didn't even know that spinach was a leafy green. I thought it was just this green plop that came out of a can, which I loved. But so we have to recognize that the history of Alaska and rural Alaska especially, you're not going to convince rural Alaskans to eat bitter greens if they're not familiar with them. And so it has to be culturally and lifestyle appropriate. In Palmer, I am so blessed to buy root vegetables until March or sometimes May, and then we grow them again. And so it really has to be site specific. But if you're looking at the state as a whole and you're looking at resilience, that food security piece, we have the ability to focus on our own agriculture in the state and combine it with subsistence use for all Alaskans. We have the ability to be security on a ship or on a plane. So yeah.
Great. Thank you for that, Jackie. You know, I had to laugh when you talked about the spinach. I was born and raised in Fairbanks before statehood. And yes, I thought spinach was supposed to be gray and mushy because that's how it came out of the can. I didn't know asparagus was actually crispy. Again, it didn't come out of the can that way. But things have changed here. But with the climate change, what, do we have more potential for actually some increased growing of things further north? I'm hearing about salmon being identified quite far north in Canada. Bruno, did you want to add something along those lines?
I do, but I'm having some internet connection issues. Can you hear me right now?
Yes, I can hear you.
I think, it's less about the food security piece that we're talking about. More, I was just thinking about the infrastructure bill and some of the specific things that were in it. There's this really good AVN article that lines some of these pieces out. I think it's just worth highlighting that that there is, I think it's $215 million for community, climate adaptation. I think half of that or so is for community relocation. It speaks to exactly what we're talking about now. Mm-hmm. There is, of course, there's a lot of, I'm having some trouble now. There was a lot of language in there for the water and wastewater. And also there's a lot of work in there, speaking to transforming, to more resilient power systems. Remember, these are all communities that are running off of diesel power. I think it's $260 million of funding for renewable projects. So I'm just thinking about what's ahead. And also, here's the number, it's coming up. It's $6 billion for energy efficiency measures, $6 billion on weatherization. So that's a lot to come at us. And so it's exciting and scary at the same time, just putting that out there.
Yes, and you were participating in some of the conversations, I think, with Senator Lisa and the Energy Secretary.
Yes, we talked very, sorry, go ahead.
No, did you touch on any of these things?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, quite frankly, that was the premise of the whole trip, right? The Secretary of Energy, Secretary Granholm, it was on a 2-day trip. We had the honor of her starting and framing the conversation here at CCHRC, and it was all about exactly what we're talking about. Really the focus in this case was on the built environment, but also water and wastewater. She sees it. Everything we're talking about right now is on the tip of the tongue and front of mind for the Energy Secretary. And really, to her credit, you think Energy Secretary, you think she's just all about renewable energy, and it's not. she sees it systematically. She sees it as it touches energy efficiency, as it touches water, wastewater, the people. She's very much a people type person. So anyway, we're in really good hands, I think, in terms of vision for while we have her. She is really going to be an advocate for Alaska.
That is great to hear. Jackie, did you meet with her also?
I did not, but I did want to add on the agricultural piece. You know, in communities like Alaskans, where you have summers that are 100 degrees and then you have winters that are -70, your growing season is different. So agriculture in Alaska, again, I just want to make sure that we recognize that this is very site specific. But root vegetables grow pretty well in cold weather. And root vegetables are what indigenous people love to put in their seal oil. So there is an opportunity, but it has to be an appropriate solution. It can't just be across the board. What works in Palmer is going to work in Kotzebue or in Kivalina or in Alaskans. It has to be recognizing what do they naturally buy from the store? Like you said, fruits and vegetables. If they're used to canned stuff, they're not going to acclimate to fresh stuff right away. So I just wanted to add that to Bruce.
Very good, very good. Well, I'm not seeing any more questions in the Q&A box. We've got some great information in our chat boxes, in the chat theme there. And I'm going to let the folks from Nature Conservancy answer those questions about the contact information for participants. Participants, perhaps you could let the Nature Conservancy know if, or if you would like to share your contact information, you could type it into chat. For all of you that are willing to share it, I've seen some questions about that. So we're getting close to the end of our time. I want to thank this outstanding group of participants. Hugh Short, Jocelyn Fenton, Jackie Schaeffer, and Bruno Gruno. Thank you so much. This has been a rich conversation. You've got expert input, and this was a great conversation. Any closing remarks?
I just want to thank you, Senator Giessel, for the opportunity to be here. Really appreciate the questions and the input from the participants, and then of course the panelists. It's an honor to be here with you all. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for all the great questions.
They have been great questions. Yes, Jackie.
Yeah, and I'll repeat that, Kriana, for the invite and the opportunity to share. And feel free to contact me if you have more questions.
Very good. You know, one of the things that I especially appreciated was how much you all talked about working together. That, you know, we are a big state, but we're actually a small town on a large lot, right? We interconnect with each other, and that's what makes us such a great place to live. I want to also thank the Nature Conservancy in Alaska for hosting this really great conversation today. Please consider joining the Nature Conservancy as the Alaska Climate Opportunity Assessment Series continues. On September 8th at 10:30, the topic will be Informed Generations, Indigenous Leadership on Climate. Then again on September 16th, the subject will be Alaska's Natural Emerging Climate Solutions. So these are great topics as well. I'm sure they'll be very rich conversations. You can learn more about the Nature Conservancy in Alaska and the Alaska Climate Opportunities Assessment Series by visiting nature.org/AK Climate Opportunity. I believe that was posted in the chat, and you can register there for future sessions. So again, thank you to all of the panelists, and thank you to all of you that signed on today. I want to wish you a great rest of your day. Thanks so much. Goodbye.